Building Doorman fires manager after 15 years. No one knew he was the real owner. Robert Johnson felt his heart race as he watched yet another scene he had witnessed hundreds of times before. His hands trembled slightly as he held the master key to the building, but this time something inside him had changed. That was when he saw Richard Thompson, the building manager, pointing his finger in Mrs. Margaret's face, a 78-year-old woman who could barely stand with her cane. "You have 3 days to pay off this debt or I'll evict you from this apartment myself," Richard shouted, waving a piece of paper in front of the elderly woman's face. "But Mr. Richard, I already explained, my social security check was delayed this month. The bank said, I don't want to hear excuses, everyone else here pays on time except you." Robert took a deep breath. 15 years. 15 long years of watching that man humiliate residents, embezzle condo fees, and act like he owned the place. Today, it would finally end. "Mr. Richard," Robert said, stepping forward with firm strides. The manager turned with a scowl. "What is it, Robert? Can't you see I'm handling important matters?" "Actually, I'm the one handling important matters. You're fired." A heavy silence fell over the lobby. Richard let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Have you lost your mind? A doorman firing a manager? Get back to your security booth before I fire you first." "You can't fire me," Robert replied, pulling a yellowed envelope from the inner pocket of his navy blue uniform. "Because I own this building." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. Richard's laughter died in his throat. Mrs. Margaret steadied herself on her cane, eyes wide. Other residents on their way to work froze mid-step, as if time had stopped. "What are you talking about?" Richard whispered, all arrogance gone from his voice. Robert carefully opened the envelope, handling it like something sacred. Inside was an old deed, stamped and signed over 20 years ago. "This is the original deed for Hope residents. I bought this land and built this place in 1998. My name is right here. See?" He held out the document for everyone to see. On the yellowed paper, it was clearly written, "Robert William Johnson, businessman, American, sole owner of the property." Mrs. Margaret stepped closer, adjusting her glasses. "Good heavens, and it's true. I always thought there was something special about you, Robert. The way you treat everyone, how you know every corner of this building." "This can't be real," Richard yelled, trying to snatch the paper from Robert's hands. "You're a doorman, a lowly employee." "I've been a doorman for 15 years, Robert confirmed, carefully tucking the deed away. "But before that, I was a businessman. Robert William Johnson, owner of Johnson & Sons Construction. Maybe you've heard of it." Whispers spread through the lobby. Johnson & Sons had been one of the city's biggest construction firms in the 90s, responsible for dozens of residential and commercial buildings. "But how?" Richard stammered. "How does a businessman become a doorman?" Robert finished with a sad smile. "It's a long story, Mr. Richard. A story of betrayal, loss, and new beginnings. And also a story of observation. 15 years watching what you did to my building." Mrs. Margaret moved closer, her eyes glistening. "You lost everything, didn't you? That's why you came to work here." "I lost almost everything, Mrs. Margaret, but not what mattered most. I didn't lose my dignity, my honesty, or my respect for others, things you, Mr. Richard, clearly never had." The building manager was pale, sweating coldly. He was starting to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Look, Robert, Mr. Johnson, I think we can talk about this calmly. Maybe there were some misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" Robert's voice rose for the first time. "Was it a misunderstanding when you raised the condo fee by 300% over the last 5 years? A misunderstanding when you made up fake repairs to embezzle money? A misunderstanding when you humiliated Mrs. Margaret and other residents struggling financially? I can explain all of this. I'm sure you can, and you will, but not to me, to the proper authorities." Robert turned to the residents now gathering in the lobby. "Everyone, please go back to your apartments. I'll call an emergency meeting tonight at 8 in the community room. We have a lot to discuss." When the lobby emptied, leaving only Robert, Richard, and Mrs. Margaret, silence returned. Richard made one last attempt. "Even if this deed is real, you can't just fire me like this. There's a legal process, a meeting." "You're right," Robert agreed. "There is a process. But as the sole owner of the building, I can call an emergency meeting any time. And after what I revealed tonight, your job as building manager will be the least of your worries." Richard stormed off, muttering threats. Mrs. Margaret stayed with Robert. "Mr. Robert, may I still call you that?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret, always." "Why did you wait so long? Why not reveal who you were sooner?" Robert looked at the lobby walls as if he could see through them to all the stories this place held. "Because when I came here, I was broken. Not just financially, but emotionally. I'd lost my company, my home, nearly my family. I needed to rebuild who I was as a person before I could rebuild anything else." "What happened to your company?" "My business partner, my childhood best friend, betrayed me. Forged my signature on contracts, embezzled money, falsified documents. By the time I found out, it was too late. The company went bankrupt and I was left with all the debt." Mrs. Margaret touched Robert's arm gently. "That must have been terrible." "It was, but you know what was worse? Realizing people I'd blindly trusted were capable of such cruelty. It made me question everything about my ability to judge character." "Is that why you came to work here?" "At first, it was just a job. I needed money to support my family, and this was the only property I'd kept in my name, without my partner knowing. I thought about selling it, but something stopped me." "What?" "My wife, Mary. She said this building was built with so much love, so much care, that I shouldn't just discard it in desperation. She suggested I work here temporarily until things settled. And she was right. She was. The first few months I just wanted to stay invisible, do my job, and leave. But slowly I got to know the residents, their stories, their struggles, and I realized this place could be more than just a building, it could be a community." "You changed this place, Mr. Robert. We all feel it." "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret. But now it's time to fix what's wrong." That afternoon, Robert went floor by floor, knocking on doors, talking to residents, explaining the situation. Reactions ranged from shock and disbelief to, gradually, understanding. Mrs. Barbara from apartment 304 was one of the first to understand. "I always thought it was strange how much you knew about the building structure, and the way you talked about every detail, as if I had planned each one myself," Robert completed. "Because I did." "And why didn't you say anything when Richard started with those outrageous charges?" "Because I needed to understand exactly what was happening. For the last 15 years, I've documented everything. Every irregular charge, every decision made without a meeting, every dollar misused." Mrs. Barbara's eyes widened. "Do you have proof?" "I have plenty of proof, Mrs. Barbara. And tonight, everyone will see it." As the news spread through the building, Robert received constant visits at his security booth. Mr. Walter from apartment 201 came down visibly emotional. "Robert, my boy, is it really true?" "It's true, Mr. Walter." "My God. And here I was complaining to you about the elevator being slow as if it were your fault. You never disrespected me, Mr. Walter. Never. You've always treated me kindly, like a neighbor, a friend. That will never change. But now I understand why you've always been so attentive to all of us. You weren't just working, you were taking care of your home." "Exactly. And taking care of the people who chose to live in my home." Around 6 in the evening, as Robert was organizing the documents for the meeting, Richard appeared again, this time accompanied by his wife, Jennifer. "Robert, I need to talk to you," Richard said, his tone very different from the one he'd used that morning. "Of course. Look, maybe I was a little harsh with some of the residents, but I always acted with the building's best interests in mind." Jennifer nudged her husband with her elbow. "Richard, just say what we came to say." Jennifer thought it would be better if I apologized for some misunderstandings. "What kind of misunderstandings, Mr. Richard?" "Well, maybe some charges were a little high." "A little high?" Robert opened a folder full of documents. "You charged $15,000 to rewire the building. I have the actual estimate here, $4,000. Where did the other $11,000 go? Richard and Jennifer exchanged nervous glances. There must have been a miscalculation. A miscalculation? Robert picked up another paper. And the $8,000 to paint the facade, when the facade was never painted. And the $12,000 to renovate the community room, when the only thing that changed was a burnt-out bulb. Jennifer turned red. Richard, you told me this money was for necessary improvements. Jennifer, it's not like that. Not like what, Richard? Where is that money? Robert watched the couple's argument with interest. It was exactly what he'd expected would happen when the whole truth came out. Mr. Richard, the meeting is at 8. I suggest you and your wife be there, because the questions she's asking now, all the residents will be asking soon. When the couple left arguing down the hall, Robert returned to his documents. There was much more to reveal than just the missing money. At 8 sharp, the community room was packed. Every resident of the building was present, along with some former employees. Robert entered, still wearing his doorman's uniform, carrying a heavy box. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this special meeting. Before we begin, Richard interrupted, I'd like to question the legality of this gathering. The person who called it has no authority to do so. Actually, I do, Robert replied calmly, placing the box on the table. As the sole owner of this building, I can call meetings whenever I deem necessary. You'll need to prove you're really the owner, Richard insisted. You're right. Barbara, could you help me? Barbara, who worked as a clerk at the neighborhood notary office, stood up. Everyone, I checked the paperwork this afternoon. All the documents are correct, notarized, and registered. Robert William Johnson is indeed the owner of this building since 1998. A murmur of admiration filled the community room. But how is that possible? Asked Mrs. Elizabeth from apartment 402. If you're the owner, why do you work as a doorman? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, it's a long story, Mrs. Elizabeth, but I'll try to summarize so you all understand how we got here. Robert opened the box and began pulling out old brochures, photos, and documents. In 1995, my partner Scott Miller and I founded the construction company Johnson & Sons. We'd been friends since childhood. I trusted him like a brother. This building was one of our first projects. He showed photos of the construction, where he stood next to a blonde man, both smiling and pointing at the site. When the building was finished, we decided not to sell it right away. The plan was to wait for the area to appreciate. I registered the property solely in my name because Scott was having issues with the Internal Revenue Service at the time. What happened? Asked Mr. Walter. In 2002, I discovered Scott had forged my signature on several contracts. He'd sold 5 buildings we'd built, pocketed the money, and even took out loans in the company's name without my knowledge. Oh my God, murmured Mrs. Margaret. By the time everything came to light, the company was already bankrupt. I was left responsible for all the debts. I lost my house, my cars, almost everything I had. My wife Mary had to go back to teaching to support us. Robert picked up a photo of himself standing beside a brunette woman in front of a large house. This was our home. We had to sell it to pay off some of the debts. Then why did you come to work here? Pressed Mrs. Elizabeth. Because this was the only asset I had left. Scott never knew I'd registered it solely in my name. In desperation, I thought about selling it, but Mary convinced me not to. She was right, said Mrs. Margaret. This place is special. She said I'd put too much love into this building to just let it go. She suggested I come work here temporarily until I could get back on my feet financially. What did people think about the owner working as an employee? Asked Barbara. At first, no one knew. I introduced myself as Robert Johnson, leaving out the surname Williams. I needed anonymity to process everything that had happened. But 15 years is a long time, observed Mr. Walter. True, but something unexpected happened. I started to enjoy being here. I got to know each of you, your stories, your struggles. I watched families grow, children become adults, people facing hardships and overcoming them. Robert looked around the room, making eye contact with several people. Remember when Mrs. Dorothy from 103 got sick and had to stay in the hospital for 2 months. Several people nodded. I organized a schedule so someone would always visit her, bring home-cooked meals, take care of her plants. Do you think an ordinary building manager would do that? Never, replied Mrs. Elizabeth. Richard barely even greets us in the elevator. And when Barbara's son was unemployed, who got him a job at my brother-in-law's construction company? Barbara grew emotional. You did. I've always wanted to thank you properly. And when Mrs. Margaret needed money for her eye surgery, who lent it without charging interest? Mrs. Margaret began to cry. Robert, I had no idea. I thought it was just your natural kindness. It was kindness, Mrs. Margaret, but it was also responsibility. You weren't just tenants to me. You were people who chose to live in my home. That created a commitment. Richard, who had stayed quiet until then, spoke up. That's all very noble, Robert, but it doesn't change the fact that I was democratically elected as building manager. You can't just fire me. I can and I will, but first I want everyone to know why. Robert opened a folder full of documents and photos. For the last 15 years, I've systematically documented every irregularity committed under Mr. Richards' management. He began handing out copies of the documents. Here are charges for repairs that were never done. Here, inflated estimates. Here, minutes for meetings that never happened. The room was completely silent. People examined the papers with expressions of shock and outrage. $15,000 to rewire the building, $12,000 to renovate the community room, $8,000 to paint the facade, $6,000 to waterproof the water tank. Altogether, over $60,000 were embezzled in the last 5 years. These are baseless accusations, Richard protested. Baseless? Robert stood up, grabbing a digital camera. I photographed every original estimate. I can prove every charge was inflated. He connected the camera to a projector and began displaying the images on the wall. Here's the real estimate for the wiring, $4,000. Here's the one presented to the residents, $15,000. The outrage in the room grew. And that's not all, Robert continued. Richard, would you like to explain to the residents why your wife is driving a brand new $80,000 car when your declared salary as building manager is $2,000 a month? Jennifer turned red. That car was an inheritance from my aunt. Your aunt who died last year, Robert asked. Because I have the dealership invoice right here, dated 6 months ago. Richard began sweating visibly. You have no right to investigate our private lives. I didn't investigate. I just observed. For 15 years, I watched this man grow rich at your expense. Mrs. Elizabeth stood up, visibly angry. Richard, where is our condo fee money? I can explain everything. There are technical reasons. What technical reasons? Mr. Walter interrupted. You stole from us. Everyone calm down, Robert said. I know you're upset, but let's handle this the right way. He pulled another document from the box. As the owner of this building, I have the right to remove any building manager who's harming the property. But to keep this democratic, I'll put it to a vote. A vote? Mrs. Barbara asked. Yes, all in favor of immediately removing Richard Thompson as building manager. Please raise your hand. Every hand in the room went up at once. Even Jennifer, embarrassed, voted against her husband. The decision is unanimous, Robert declared. Richard Thompson is officially removed as building manager. Richard stood up furiously. This isn't over. I'll sue everyone. You won't do anything, Robert interrupted calmly. Because if you make a scene, I'll hand all this documentation over to the Internal Revenue Service, and then your worries will be much bigger than losing a manager's position. Richard stormed out, dragging Jennifer by the arm. When the door closed, the room erupted in excited chatter. Robert, Mrs. Margaret said, approaching him, now we need to elect a new building manager. Actually, Mrs. Margaret, I have a different proposal. The room fell silent again. As you know, I've always wanted this place to be more than just a building. I wish for this to be a community. So my proposal is that we create a collective administration where important decisions are made in assemblies with full transparency. And who would be the legal representative? Asked Mrs. Barbara. I propose Mr. George, who has worked here as a janitor for 8 years. He's always been honest, knows all the residents and understands the building's maintenance. Mr. George, a man around 50 sitting at the back of the community room, looked surprised. Me, Robert? But I don't have the education for that. You have something far more important, Mr. George. You have integrity, and I'll help you with all the bureaucratic aspects. The proposal was accepted unanimously. Mr. George was elected the new building manager on the condition that all major decisions would be made collectively. Now, to wrap things up, Robert said, I want to share a decision I made today. He picked up a different folder from the box. As the owner of this building, I have the right to set the condo fee. Starting next month, it will be reduced by 50%. The room erupted in applause and cheers. But how is that possible? Asked Mrs. Elizabeth. Simple. All these years, Richard was charging outrageous amounts to pocket the difference. With honest and transparent management, it's perfectly possible to maintain the building at half the current cost. And what about you, Robert? Asked Mr. Walter. Will you keep working as the doorman? Robert smiled. Yes, Mr. Walter. I've come to enjoy this job. I like taking care of people, being part of your daily lives. Being a businessman again would be a responsibility I no longer want. But now everyone knows who you are. And that changes nothing. I'll still be the Robert you've always known. The only difference is I won't have to pretend I don't understand when someone tampers with the building's electrical system, he said, making everyone laugh. Mrs. Margaret approached him again. Robert, may I ask you something personal? Of course, Mrs. Margaret. Your wife. Is she still... Robert lowered his eyes, visibly emotional. Mary passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry. She always said I should reveal the truth one day, that people had the right to know who was really looking after them. I think she'd be happy knowing I finally found the courage. The room fell into respectful silence for a moment. And your children? Asked Mrs. Barbara. Do they know about your decision? I have 2. David, who's an engineer, and Emily, a teacher like her mother. They've always known my story. At first, they thought I was wasting my life working as a doorman, but over time they understood I was happy here. And they agree with all this? They do. In fact, it was David who helped me organize all this paperwork. He said I was being unfair to myself by letting Richard take advantage of your trust. Your son is right, said Mrs. Elizabeth. You should have spoken up sooner. Maybe. But everything has its right time. I felt it wasn't the moment yet. What made you feel today was the moment? Asked Mr. Walter. Robert looked at Mrs. Margaret. Seeing Richard humiliate Mrs. Margaret this morning was the last straw. I realized my silence was letting good people be mistreated. That went against everything I've ever believed in. Mrs. Margaret teared up again. Thank you, Robert, for everything. No need to thank me, Mrs. Margaret. In truth, I'm the one who should thank all of you. Thank us for what? For teaching me that wealth isn't measured in money. For showing me a community can be a family. For giving me purpose when I'd lost all meaning in life. The meeting ended in celebration. The people continued chatting excitedly, making plans to improve the building and discussing ways to make living together even better. When everyone went up to their apartments, Robert was left alone in the community room, organizing his documents. He was putting the papers back in the box when he heard footsteps behind him. Robert? He turned and saw a young woman around 30 years old whom he didn't recognize. Yes? My name is Amanda. I'm Richard's daughter. Robert studied her for a few seconds. Her expression was different from her father's or mother's. She seemed genuinely embarrassed. What can I do for you, miss? I wanted to apologize for my father, and I wanted to know if there's any way he can return the money he took. Does your family have that money? Not all of it, but some. I work, I have some savings, and today I found out my father has a savings account he hid from my mother. Why do you want to do this, Amanda? Because it's the right thing to do, and because I'm ashamed to be the daughter of someone who did this to such good people as the residents here. Robert was impressed by the young woman's sincerity. Amanda, you're not responsible for your father's mistakes. Maybe not, but I can try to fix them. All right, I'll accept your offer, but on one condition. What? That the money is returned officially with a receipt, so your father publicly takes responsibility for what he did. Will he agree to that? If he doesn't, I'll hand over all the documentation to the authorities. Make that clear to him." Amanda nodded in agreement and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned back once more. "Robert, can I ask one more question?" "Of course." "Why are you so good with people?" Robert smiled. "I'm not especially good, Amanda. I've just learned that life is hard enough without making things more difficult for others." In the following days, the news of Robert's true identity spread throughout the neighborhood. Many who had known him only as the friendly doorman were amazed to learn his story. The return of the money happened as agreed. Richard, pressured by his daughter and the threat of public exposure, returned $42,000 of the $60,000 he had embezzled. It was all he had available without selling assets. "With this money," Robert explained to the residents, "we'll make all the necessary repairs, and whatever's left, we'll set up an emergency fund for the condo." "What if Richard tries to get revenge?" asked Mrs. Elizabeth. "He won't. He has too much to lose if this story goes public. And now that his daughter knows everything, he'll have to behave." The building's transformation was remarkable. With transparent management and fair fees, the atmosphere improved drastically. People began greeting each other more, attending meetings and helping one another. Robert kept his routine as the doorman, but now with a different kind of freedom. He no longer had to pretend he didn't understand certain things or hide his knowledge about the building's structure. "You know what amazes me the most?" Mrs. Margaret said one afternoon when she came down to talk to him in the security booth. "What's that, Mrs. Margaret?" "How you managed to keep this double life going for so long without anyone suspecting." "Actually, some people did suspect." "Who?" "You, for example. I noticed several times that you looked at me differently, as if you knew there was something more." "That's true. I always thought there was something special about you. The way you spoke, how you solved problems, how you treated people. And Mr. Walter, too. He always asked very specific questions about the building's construction, as if testing my knowledge. He really suspected." "I think so. The other day he told me he always found it strange for a doorman to know so many technical details." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A few weeks later, Robert received an unexpected visitor. It was a well-dressed man, around 50 years old, who introduced himself as an attorney. "Mr. Johnson, my name is attorney Mark Anderson. I represent the construction company New Horizon." "Of course, sir. How can I help you?" "We heard about your story through a mutual client. We're impressed with how you handled this situation." "Thank you, but I didn't do anything extraordinary." "On the contrary, you showed a maturity and wisdom we rarely see in the business world. That's why I'd like to make you a proposal." Robert invited him up to the empty apartment he kept on the top floor so they could speak more privately. "Our company is going through a restructuring," the attorney explained. "We need someone with experience, but above all with ethics to guide us. What kind of help? We'd like to hire you as a consultant. It wouldn't be a formal job, but advisory work, especially on matters related to client and community relations." "Attorney Anderson, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to the corporate world." "I understand your hesitation, but think about it. This would be a chance to use your experience to prevent others from going through what the residents here endured." Robert grew thoughtful. "Can I give you an answer in a few days?" "Of course, but before I go, I'd like to make another proposal." "What is it?" "How about writing your story? Many people could learn from your experience." "Writing a book?" "Exactly. We know a publisher that would be very interested in a story like yours." After the attorney left, Robert reflected on the offers. He went up to the apartment where he had lived with his wife before becoming a doorman. He had kept everything exactly as it was, like a sanctuary. He picked up a photo of Mary from the desk. "What do you think, my love? Is it time to take this step?" Of course, there was no answer, but he felt an inner peace he took as approval. The next day, he went to see Mrs. Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret, can I ask for your advice?" "Of course, Robert. What's on your mind?" He told her about the proposals he'd received. "And what is your heart telling you?" "It's torn. On one hand, I'd like to stay here, with all of you, in this simple life we've built. On the other, maybe it's selfish not to use my experience to help others. Robert, can I be honest? Please. You've already done more for us than anyone could ask. You protected us, cared for us, and taught us the value of honesty. But maybe it's time to share those lessons with a wider audience. Do you think I should accept? I think you should at least try, and do you know why? Why? Because there are many Richards out there, doing to others what he did to us. And there are many Roberts who have given up fighting. Your story could inspire them. And if I accept, would you all be okay here? Of course. You taught us to take care of each other. Besides, it doesn't mean you're leaving for good, right? That's true, I could work as a consultant a few hours a day and still live here. Exactly, the best of both worlds. Robert decided to accept both proposals. He began working as a consultant 3 days a week and started writing his story on weekends. The work at the construction company was eye-opening. He discovered many businesses faced problems similar to what he had experienced: lack of trust between partners, difficulties with client relations, ethical dilemmas. What impresses me the most, Robert said to attorney Mark Anderson after a few months of working together, is how the same problems repeat themselves in different places. And what do you think is the root of these problems? The lack of solid values. People think they can achieve financial success without personal integrity, but sooner or later the bill comes due, like in your case with your former partner. Exactly. Scott was always too ambitious, wanted to grow too fast. I preferred to grow slowly but steadily. That difference in vision is what drove us apart long before the betrayal. And today, do you still keep in touch with him? No. I heard he started another company in another state. I hope he learned something from what happened. Have you forgiven him? Robert thought for a moment before answering. Yes, I have. Not for his sake, but for mine. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's an interesting philosophy. It's a necessary philosophy for anyone who wants to live in peace. The book writing was going well. Robert decided to focus not just on his personal story, but on the lessons he'd learned throughout his life. He wanted it to be a practical book, something that could truly help people in similar situations. How's the book coming along? Mrs. Barbara asked one afternoon when she came down to pick up a package. It's harder than I imagined. Why? Because it's tricky to talk about yourself without sounding pretentious, and also because it stirs up memories I'd rather leave buried. Memories of the betrayal? That too. But mostly memories of Mary. She was a big part of all the important decisions in my life. Would she have supported your decision to write the book? I'm sure she would. Mary always said that difficult experiences only matter if we can turn them into wisdom for others. Then keep writing, for her and for all of us who believe in your story. One day, on his way back from the construction company, Robert noticed unusual activity in the building. There were several unfamiliar people moving around the lobby. What's going on? He asked Mr. George. Robert, some people came by asking for you. They said they're from a publishing house. A publishing house? But I haven't even finished the book yet. Seems they heard about your story through other channels. They're very interested. Robert went upstairs to find 3 people waiting in the condo's meeting room. A woman around 40 introduced herself as an editor, accompanied by a journalist and a photographer. Mr. Johnson, we heard about your story through attorney Mark Anderson. We were fascinated. Thank you, but I'm still writing. We know. Actually, we'd like to propose something different. How so? How about we do a special feature on your story for a magazine while you finish the book? I'm not sure that's a good idea. Why not? Because I don't want my story to come across as a fairy tale. I want people to understand it was a difficult journey with plenty of mistakes and lessons. That's exactly what we want to show, the reality behind the transformation. Robert agreed to the interview, but with a few conditions. He wanted other residents to be heard too, so the story wouldn't revolve solely around him. The article was published 2 months later and had a bigger impact than anyone expected. Hundreds of people wrote letters sharing similar stories, asking for advice and opening up about their own experiences. Robert, Mrs. Margaret said, showing him a stack of letters, look how many people your story has touched. It really is incredible. Are you going to answer all of them? I'll try. Each of these letters represents someone going through hardships. If my experience can help, it's my duty to share it. And the book, how's it coming? I'm in the final stretch. I want to finish the story about the meeting and the changes here in the building. And after the book, any more plans? Actually, yes. Attorney Mark Anderson invited me to give talks on business ethics, and there's a university interested in creating a course on human relationships in business. Will you accept? I'm not sure yet. It depends on one thing. On what? On all of you. If you'll let me keep living here, the way I always have. Mrs. Margaret smiled. Robert, this is your home. It always has been and always will be. A few months later, the book, From the Top to the Gate, A Journey of New Beginnings, was published. The book signing was held right in the building's community room, at Robert's suggestion. I want it to be here, he said, because this is where I learned the most important lessons of my life. The evening was emotional. Not only did the residents attend, but so did many people who had read the magazine article. Among them were several who had gone through similar experiences of starting over. Robert, said a man around 60, who had lost everything in a financial scam, your story gave me hope. Thank you. No need to thank me. We all have the ability to start over. Sometimes we just need an example to believe it. And in my case, that example was you. Throughout the night, Robert received many moving testimonials, but the one that struck him most was from a young businesswoman. Mr. Johnson, my name is Jessica. I own a small construction company. Nice to meet you, Jessica. I wanted to thank you for writing this book. I was going through serious problems with a dishonest partner. Your story helped me make a tough decision. What decision? I dissolved the partnership before it was too late. I lost money, but I kept my integrity. You did the right thing. And now I'm starting over on my own. More carefully, more wisely. That's the most important part. Learning from mistakes so you don't repeat them. When the evening ended and everyone had left, Robert stood alone in the community room reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few years. Mr. Walter came down to help clean up. So, Robert, how do you feel? Strange. 5 years ago, I was just a doorman no one noticed. Today, people I've never met want to hear my story. Does that bother you? A little. I never wanted to be an example for anyone. I just wanted to live my life in peace. But that's exactly what makes you an example. Your humility, your authenticity. Maybe you're right. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you regret anything? Robert thought carefully before answering. I regret taking so long to trust people again. After Scott's betrayal, I closed my heart for a long time. But that's natural. It is, but it's also harmful. I missed chances to make friends, to help people, to build relationships because of fear. And what changed? All of you. The residents here. You showed me there are still good people in the world, that it's worth trusting, even if there's a risk of disappointment. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for teaching me to trust again. By the end of that year, Robert received a surprising invitation. A university wanted him as a visiting professor in their business administration program. A professor? He laughed on the phone. But I don't have the academic background for that. Mr. Johnson, the program coordinator replied, you have something far more valuable, life experience. Our students need to learn that business isn't just about numbers, it's about human relationships. And what exactly would I teach? Business ethics, client relations, crisis management, leadership. Topics you've mastered in practice. I'll need to think about it. Of course, but no, it would only be 2 classes a week. You could keep up with your other activities. Robert talked to the residents about the proposal. The reaction was unanimously positive. Robert, said Mrs. Elizabeth, you have an obligation to accept. Why? Because how many young entrepreneurs could benefit from your teachings? How many betrayals could be avoided? How many businesses could be more honest? When you put it that way, that's how it is. You don't have the right to keep all that wisdom to yourself." Robert accepted the invitation. His classes quickly became the most sought after in the course. The students were fascinated by the real-life cases he shared. "Professor Johnson," asked a student after a lesson on ethics, "how is it possible to uphold principles in such a competitive world?" "It's a matter of choice, Samantha. You can choose to succeed at any cost, or you can choose to succeed with integrity. But what if the competition doesn't play fair? Then you have two options: play dirty and lose your soul, or keep your integrity and sleep with a clear conscience." But sometimes it seems like those who play dirty come out ahead. In the short term, maybe. But in the long run, the truth always comes out, and when it does, it destroys everything built on lies. Like with your former partner? Exactly. Scott may have made quick money from betrayal, but he lost far more. He lost friendships, his reputation, and his peace of mind. And you? Didn't you lose too? I lost money. I lost material things. But I gained something far more valuable. I learned who I truly am when everything falls apart around me. Robert's classes became so popular that the university created an extension course open to the public. Business owners from all over the city came to hear his talks. "This is getting too big," he commented to Mrs. Margaret. "And does that bother you?" "A little. I'm afraid people might start seeing me as some kind of guru or something." "Robert, you still live here. You're still our doorman. You're still the same humble person you've always been. That will never change." "I hope not. And besides, think of how many people can benefit from your teachings." It was true. Letters kept arriving daily, people sharing how his story had changed their lives, how his teachings had saved businesses, how his examples had transformed relationships. One day, Robert received a letter that moved him deeply. It was from Amanda, Richard's daughter. "Dear Robert, I hope you're well. I'm writing to share some news. I've started my own accounting consulting firm. And you know what sets it apart? Total transparency with clients, ethics above all. Your example taught me it's possible to do business without harming anyone. Every day, when I face a tough decision, I ask myself, what would Robert do? My father still hasn't fully understood what he did wrong, but he's trying to change. He started volunteering at a senior care facility. Maybe it's his way of making amends. Thank you for showing us a better path." "With admiration, Amanda." "Look at this," he showed Mrs. Margaret. "Richard's daughter started a business based on the principles we stand for here. See how your lessons multiply? It's truly remarkable. I never imagined a decision made in anger could have such far-reaching consequences." "It wasn't a decision made in anger, Robert. It was a decision made with love." "How so?" "You didn't remove Richard out of spite. You did it out of love for us, the residents, out of love for justice, out of love for what's right." "Maybe you're right." 2 years later, Robert received an invitation that genuinely surprised him. The state government wanted to create a business ethics program with him as the lead consultant. "It's a big responsibility," he said to the secretary who came to make the proposal. "We know that, but we also know you're the right person for this." "Why are you so sure?" "Because you've already proven in practice that it's possible to do business ethically, and because you have credibility with both business owners and workers." "I need to think about it." "Of course. But know this would be an opportunity to influence public policies, to create laws that protect people like the residents of your building." Robert accepted the offer to join the program, but again, with conditions. He wanted it to be practical, something that truly reached people, not just another bureaucratic project. The program launched with great success. Companies across the state began adopting the principles of transparency and ethics he proposed. Robert gave talks, attended meetings, and helped create guidelines. "How does it feel to be a public figure?" a journalist asked in an interview. "Strange. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to live my life in peace." "But don't you think you have a social responsibility?" "I believe we all have social responsibility. The difference is some people have more opportunities to act on it." "And do you plan to keep living in the building where you work as a doorman?" "Of course, that's my home. Those people are my family." "Don't you find it contradictory to be a government consultant and a doorman at the same time?" "I don't see any contradiction. Work defines me as a person, not its social status. The interview resonated very positively. Many praised Robert's humility and the consistency between his words and actions. But not everything was perfect. Some questioned his credibility, calling it personal branding. "How do you handle criticism?" Mr. Walter asked. "Naturally, criticism is part of public life. What matters is staying true to what I say and do. Some of it is pretty harsh. It is, but it also helps keep me humble. Whenever I start thinking I'm special, I read criticism and remember I'm just a human like everyone else." "Do you regret stepping out of anonymity?" "Sometimes, yes. It was easier when I was just the building's doorman. But if my story can inspire even one person to make the right choices, then it was worth it." On the 5th anniversary of the famous meeting that changed everything, the residents threw Robert a surprise party. "Speech! Speech!" everyone chanted in the community room. Robert, visibly moved, stood up. "5 years ago, I made a decision that changed our lives. But now I realize the one who really changed was me." "How so?" Mrs. Margaret asked. "You all taught me that leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about serving. That wealth isn't what you have, but what you share. That success isn't about beating others, but helping them succeed. You taught us far more," Mr. George said. "Maybe, but the learning went both ways. I was a failed businessman, bitter and full of fear. You turned me into a better person. And now, what's next? To keep being this building's doorman. To keep looking after you all. To keep learning every day. What about your public work?" "I'll continue that too, but I'll always remember it all started here, with you, in this community that became my family." The party lasted into the early hours. There was music, laughter, and endless conversation. Robert watched it all with a heart full of gratitude. At 3 a.m., when everyone had gone up to their apartments, he stayed alone in the community room, as he always did after events. It was his moment to reflect. He took out the photo of Mary he always carried in his wallet. "We did it, love. We turned our pain into wisdom, our loss into something good for others. I think you'd be proud." Of course, there was no answer. But Robert felt an inner peace that he interpreted as the approval he had always sought. He went up to his apartment and, before sleeping, did what he always did. Wrote down the day's reflections in his journal. Today marks 5 years since the night that changed everything. 5 years since I decided to stop being a victim of circumstances and take control of my life. 5 years since I learned that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in relationships. If I could go back in time and change something, would I? Would I avoid Scott's betrayal? Would I prevent the company's bankruptcy? No, because it was precisely by going through those hardships that I learned who I truly am. It was by losing everything that I discovered what really matters. Today, I am richer than I ever was as a businessman. Rich in friendships, rich in purpose, rich in peace of mind. And most importantly, today I know my life has meaning, that every day I wake up, I can make a difference in someone's life, whether by opening a gate, teaching a class, or writing a response letter to someone who needs guidance. Mary was right when she said that when God closes a door, he opens a window. My window was the people in this building. It was through them that I found my new purpose in life. Tomorrow will be another day of work. I'll wake up early, put on my uniform, open the gates, greet the residents, and take care of the building's security. And in the afternoon, I'll teach at the university. In the evening, I'll answer letters from people seeking guidance. It's a simple life, but it's a fulfilling one. It's a life that makes sense. And in the end, that's what matters. Having a life that means something. Robert closed his journal, turned off the light, and prepared to sleep. Through the window, he could see the city lights still glowing, millions of people living their lives, facing their problems, searching for solutions. Some of them, perhaps, were going through the same thing he had years ago. Some, maybe, needed an example to believe it was possible to start over, and to think it had all begun with a simple decision, not to let Richard keep humiliating Mrs. Margaret. A small decision, made in a moment of indignation, that turned into a complete life change. Robert smiled in the dark. Life was truly full of surprises, and the best surprises often came disguised as problems. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this story. Do you think Robert made the right decisions? Leave your honest opinion in the comments about this journey of new beginnings and overcoming challenges. If you know someone who's gone through something similar, share this story. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.